Next we have Kiraz speaking from the Wikileaks Support Coalition and Socialist Alternative. Thanks.
Sorry, I'm speaking on behalf of the Wikileaks Support Coalition. Well, I think the Wikileaks US Embassy cable leaks in December last year really exploded onto the world stage in a spectacular fashion, and have really exposed the crisis of legitimacy of the United States government and other governments around the world. Exposed, we've seen a whole litany of abuses, corruption, espionage, war crimes, and attacks on any country that opposes US domination of the world. And the cables, I think it's also important to look at what the cables reveal about our government here in Australia. And it's pretty clear that the cables show the complicity of the Gillard government with the US, with this global US agenda. For the first time in the leaks, we see our politicians talking honestly, saying what they really think. Hence we hear Kevin Rudd calling for the use of force against China. We find out that Mark Habib has been acting as a US spy. And we also... we find out, we hear about the cynical comments of Tony Abbott saying the more boats that come, the better. The cables have exposed the brutal reality of the occupation in Afghanistan, which our government is involved in, and which the majority of Australians oppose. So I think on behalf of the Wikileaks Support Coalition here today, I'd like to call on the Australian government to get its funding priorities right. We say to Julie Gillard, stop spending billions and billions of dollars on the war in Afghanistan, money for flag relief, not for war. At the same time as our government is participating in this brutal occupation, we're witnessing a disaster of epic proportions unfolding in Queensland. We're seeing many who have lost their lives, thousands and thousands of people who have lost their homes. And we're hearing about Indigenous communities that have been affected and workers that have been laid off in the thousands by mining companies who are slashing jobs and making workers pay for the crisis in Queensland. So I think I'd like to say here on behalf of the Wikileaks Support Coalition today that at this rally we're calling for we're going to give all the donations that we collect to help out, to alleviate the flood relief situation in Queensland. As activists fighting, we're not only fighting for free speech, we're fighting for social justice, we're fighting for human rights, and so the donation buckets are going around. I encourage everybody to dig deep and give as much money as they can to help out with the flood relief and the disaster in Queensland. Thank you.
Next, we have independent journalist Anthony Lowenstein coming to speak. He's also an independent writer. Thank you.
Hello, whoa. Thank you all for coming. I wanted to first start off by acknowledging traditional owners of the land and respect their elders past and present. One of the things that has been mentioned by some of the speakers today is what the WikiLeaks campaign is about and should be about. And let me just go through some of those briefly. There is in the West a war on whistleblowers. There's no other way to put it. The Fairfax Press this week, after Freedom of Information announced that the Rudd Labor government and the Labor government in the last 3.5 years has actually pursued whistleblowers double the rate of the Howard government, double the rate. In America, the Obama administration in 2 years has pursued whistleblowers far faster than the Bush administration. So that challenges the rather cosy myth that Obama is just a nice cuddly man, because he ain't. One of the things that comes up very clearly, and the New York Times had a very spurious piece this week about Bradley Manning, is talking about the conditions upon which he's living in the US. Wendy Bacon made some comments about that. And essentially the US government said, and I use the inverted commas, it was poppycock that Manning actually is in difficult circumstances. Well, the facts sadly speak for themselves. At the moment, Bradley Manning is alleged to have leaked the information. There's no hard evidence for it, and there's been no trial, and yet still Australia's closest ally in the world is putting someone under torture-like conditions. That is a shameful situation. The Australian government has not said a word about that. One of the things that also comes up with WikiLeaks that often the media, bless them, ignores is not about Julian Assange or his personal life, which are not irrelevant. The key issue is, what is WikiLeaks actually telling us about the world? What do the documents that WikiLeaks is releasing say to us about how our governments behave? And what it says is very, very clear, confirming in some ways what many of us might have thought before. Governments, our governments, who we elect, lie to us all the time. There is a litany of examples. The Middle East, Africa, Asia, Australia. Government says one thing, journalists repeat that lie, and WikiLeaks says something else. And you would think, but you'd be wrong, that the journalists themselves who actually write those kind of lies and have repeated government policy over years who have been wrong would come out and say, mea culpa. That has not happened really anywhere, as far as I know. One of the things that also becomes very clear in the last month to show that the Obama administration, that wonderful liberal outpost in Washington, has in fact increased and worsened the so-called war on terror. Drone strikes in Yemen have increased, drone strikes in Pakistan have increased, the war in Afghanistan has deepened, the war in Iraq, despite the fact that Obama came in claiming that war would end. In fact, what is happening there, and WikiLeaks has revealed that in the Iraq logs in 2010, last year, is what's happening there is not the end of the occupation, it's a rebranding into a privatised war. That a lot of the US troops will leave, many will stay, but to replace that will be a privatised army to kind of manage the situation, to kind of make sure that the Iraqis are behaving themselves nicely and well. And the reality, of course, of that will be further resistance, which many of us should support. One of the things that I find quite remarkable about WikiLeaks, amongst so many others, is the response of many in the mainstream press. There are many notable exceptions to this. I'm not going to generally say the media's done a bad job. However, in America, virtually every single leading journalist organisation, according to McClatchy, which is a US news organisation last week, said they would not categorically come out and say, we defend what WikiLeaks is doing. Not one. Not one. And what that says to us is very, very clear. If you look at how the New York Times, that other wonderful bastion of journalism in America, has responded to this, the view of WikiLeaks is a convenient source of information, but the vast majority of information WikiLeaks has released has not appeared in the New York Times at all. And the reason for that is very, very clear. Despite the fact that the paper sees itself sometimes oppositionally to the US government, it's the only newspaper that actually went to the White House to make sure it was okay to release the information first. Just to make sure that Mr. Barack Obama was okay with what the independent press was doing. Independent my ass. One of the things that often comes up as well about journalism is that most journalists, many journalists, see themselves as players. They like to be insiders, they like to be close to power. And when someone or an institution challenges that, like WikiLeaks, they get pissed off, which is why you've seen in many outlets, here and overseas, many in the media critical of how WikiLeaks behaves. They're not playing by the rules. And for many of us who are in the media, for better or worse, I celebrate not playing by the rules, because those who play by the rules lead us into Iraq and Afghanistan, Yemen, Pakistan, I could go on. As someone wrote a few days ago, don't ask me where, somewhere on the intertubes, secrecy is not the problem here. Leakers are actually the question here. And what leaking is doing, in fact, and should happen far more often, is there should be a protection upon which the general public and the media encourages people to release information. This idea somehow that the media has to choose which leaks are appropriate is not the way this should be done. There are countless individuals who have released information to WikiLeaks, according to the group themselves, and indeed to OpenLeaks, a group that's going to start in the next few months, explaining and revealing how our world works. We as citizens should support those, and start our own. There is no reason why anyone in Australia can't start a local WikiLeaks style group to release information about local government, state government, businesses. Why shouldn't we start that? I would encourage that we should. Let me finish by saying this. In 2011, what many of us in the public demand, I think I can confidently say this with this group, is greater transparency, greater freedom, a less compliant press, and a government that actually stands up for its own citizens. Thank you very much.
Our last speaker for the day is Marcus Strom from the Journalists Union. Thank you.
Thank you, friends. Comrades, my name's Marcus Strom. I'm New South Wales Vice President of the Media Union. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for coming on this rather warm day. We are very proud to have Julian Assange as a member of our union. You may have noticed just before Christmas, because of some problems with his credit cards, he'd become unfinancial with our union, and we met with his legal representatives in Melbourne to ensure that his union membership was kept up to date, and he was given a card. A couple of facts. Julia Gillard actually did step down from her first claim that Julian Assange had broken the law. That is not because it was out of the kindness of her heart. It was because of pressure that you and people like you around the country and around the world have been putting on her and the government. She realises that if Julian Assange is extradited to the United States, it will become a massive political issue in this country. Already public opinion in this country is on the side of WikiLeaks. We in the Media Union have been defending WikiLeaks' role as a publisher. Contrary, I think, to what some people have said, WikiLeaks has not just put all 253,000 cables on the internet. They have been working with media organisations and bringing them out a bit at a time so that people can have access to them, yes, and come to their own conclusions, but so that working journalists in the media at the Sydney Morning Herald, where I work, and other publications around the world have been able to digest them and present the more interesting facts to you. We're also pursuing whistleblower laws in this country. That is not only to protect the publishers of these embarrassing facts, but also to protect the heroes of people like Bradley Manning. WikiLeaks, I think, on Thursday, despite its financial problems, donated $15,000 US to the Bradley Manning Defence Fund. I urge you to do the same, possibly not at that amount, but I urge you to do the same if you're able. What is interesting about WikiLeaks is really not what has come out. Are we really surprised that Kevin Rudd is a control freak who has military fantasies against China? Are we really that surprised that Nicolas Sarkozy is a short man with a Napoleonic complex? Are we really surprised that our betters and more powerful have fantasies of dominating us? I don't think we are. That, for me, is not the interesting thing about WikiLeaks. For me, it is about challenging the very fabric of power that we are in. As the previous speaker said, Philip Adams says that it is about the powerful not being able to look over their shoulder without some fear. We need to increase that fear in them. And fundamentally, what WikiLeaks has done is reveal the idea of a civilization is based on constant lies. I don't know if free speech is the demand in this country so much. It certainly is in countries like Tunisia. But we are sick of the lies and the hypocrisy upon which they base their version of civilization. We demand, and with organisations like WikiLeaks, we will fight for a civilization worthy of its name that is based on the truth and sweeps away hypocrisy. See you on February the 6th to continue the fight.
Of the Gillard government with the US, with this global US agenda. For the first time in the leaks, we see our politicians talking honestly, saying what they really think. Hence we hear Kevin Rudd calling for the use of force against China. We find out that Mark Habib has been acting as a US spy.
Next we have Kiraz Junkie speaking from the Wikileaks Support Coalition and Socialist Alternative. Thanks.
Sorry, I'm speaking on behalf of the Wikileaks Support Coalition. Well, I think the Wikileaks US Embassy cable leaks in December last year really exploded onto the world stage in a spectacular fashion, and it really exposed the crisis of legitimacy. And we also... we find out, we hear about the cynical comments of Tony Abbott saying the more votes that come, the better. The cables have exposed the brutal reality of the occupation in Afghanistan, which our government is involved in, and which the majority of Australians oppose. So I think on behalf of the Wikileaks Support Coalition here today, I'd like to call on the Australian government to get its funding priorities right. We say to Julie Gillard, stop spending billions and billions of dollars on the war in Afghanistan, money for flood relief, not for war. At the same time as our government is participating in this brutal occupation, we've seen of the United States government and other governments around the world exposed. We've seen a whole litany of abuses, corruption, espionage, war crimes and attacks on any country that opposes US domination of the world. And the cables, I think it's also important to look at what the cables reveal about our government here in Australia. And it's pretty clear that the cables show the complicity